Hello and welcome to the Psych File, and this episode entitled Human Emotions, the Two-Factor Theory. There's this theory called the James-Lange theory that is interesting. I never really saw too much of a, everyday life application for it until I came across a very interesting article, A Console to Make You Weep. Console referring to, like a video game console. To make you weep, W-I-I-P, and that is a pretty good pun on the Nintendo Wii. If you're familiar with the Wii, it has a newfangled controller, and how it works is that instead of pushing buttons like the Xbox and the PlayStation, you move your arm, your hand, and by doing so, you move the character on the screen, or if you're playing baseball, you move your arms and that swings the bat. If you're playing bowling, that moves the ball. So it's very physically involving. And the point he's making with the article is that the Wii is more emotionally involving for players because it is more physically involving. And in fact, he spends about a paragraph or two talking about William James, one of the founders of psychology and also a philosopher. And he talked about a sort of a counterintuitive theory of emotions. And that's what we want to get into today. There's a famous study by Stanley Schachter, and I got to talk about it because it's a classic. So I had started to put everything together, and then I watched an episode of Ugly Betty. She had been spraying herself with a perfume, which caused excitement. You might lump into the area of physiological arousal, sweating, unexplained energy levels. So she didn't know what was causing her to feel this way because she didn't know what was in the perfume. It is a perfect example of this whole two-factor theory that Schachter and Singer put forth some years ago. The issue here is, where do your emotions come from? Common sense, or as one book that I looked at called it the Lazarus Theory, after Richard Lazarus, that I would call it basically what we think is that our emotions, of course, originate in our head, right? You think about something, and if it is something that is, if you think about something negatively, causes you to feel sad. Right? Think about things positively, causes you to feel positive. What we generally think of is that, okay, we got this event, and how I think about it determines my emotions. And then, of course, that also determines my physical reaction, what I do, what I decide to do as a result. Now, James-Lange, on the other hand, comes along and says, no, that's not how it occurs. His feeling is that it's physiological arousal that comes first. If you're crossing the street, you're not looking and a car screeches to a halt behind you. Well, now, what happens first? Do you have some thoughts about it? Do you think, oh, this guy's crazy? Or do those come later? Isn't it that in this particular case, the physiological arousal comes first? Your body has just this reaction, right? Your heart beats, and the amygdala, by the way, in case you're interested in the part of the brain that transmits this up to your higher cortex, would be the amygdala, which is primarily involved with fear. So you have, when a car screeches behind you, a physiological reaction. That results in a physical reaction, which in this case would be that you jump away from the car. And then finally, you would have the emotion, which would be fear. So that makes sense, right? And that's kind of the James-Lange thing. You have an event, and you have a physiological reaction first. Now, does that work for every? I don't know, that doesn't necessarily work for every emotion for me, but it certainly makes a lot of sense. So that's James-Lange. There was another one that often gets mentioned, another two researchers, Ken and Bard. And they basically argued that the physiological and the emotional reactions occur at the same time. So this was why I always felt, is this worth arguing about? Okay, so along comes Schachter and Singer. These are the guys we want to get into. And what they said is that, okay, some event occurs, you have physiological arousal, so they're sort of in agreement with James-Lange there, and then you look around you. You look to the situation and get clues from the situation to determine what you're feeling. Okay, so let's just take a couple of examples of that because it sounds a little bit bizarre. But the Ugly Betty episode is a good example of this. So she was spraying herself. She did not know why she was feeling so physiologically aroused. And all throughout the episode, she's trying to figure out, and everybody else was trying to figure out, what she was feeling. So why was she feeling that way? One moment she thought, well, it's because I'm in love, when she was around her boyfriend. Then she thought, maybe I'm angry, when she was around this sort of competing boyfriend named Gio. Other times she said, I think I'm just happy about life in general. That's what it is. So is it anger? Is it love? Is it just general happiness? And so I think this is, just as I say, a good example of sometimes we experience physical changes and we have to look for an explanation of them. I'll give you two examples from my own life. I don't know your life. I'll have to take them from my life. Okay. There was a time many years ago, I went to a funeral with friends of mine, and I didn't really know the person, but I went along to the funeral to accompany these friends. And there were a lot. This was a young person. She was maybe in her 30s or something. But anyway, there was a lot of grieving people around. And so I walked around. There was grieving people. There were pictures of her when she was smiling and laughing, and you know how a typical funeral reception is, that kind of thing. So it was, and I was unexpectedly moved by this. I felt like crying. I just didn't. I thought to myself, wow, I didn't really know her that well. I guess I must have liked her more than I thought. I mean, I found myself in that kind of, conundrum, if you will. I just didn't understand why the level of arousal and what it was due to, because I didn't really think I knew her that well. Now, what Schachter and Singer would say to something like that is that this is exactly what they're talking about. The arousal comes first. Being around people who are grieving, some loudly, causes a physical change in you. And then you say, well, I must be really sad. I suppose, maybe I really am more moved by this than I thought. Maybe I really liked her more than I thought. It does make you think when you have a strength of an emotion that you didn't think you had. Second example is quite a bit earlier. I was in college, and one of the jobs I had was to work in the gym. And so I'm not really a basketball fan, but one game I had to be at the gym to help, put the chairs out and put some of the chairs back, that sort of thing. And the home team was playing, and people were screaming, and they were getting all excited. And I remember thinking to myself, this is great. Now, and I really don't like basketball, but I thought to myself, I must really like basketball. Kind of a weird thing, but it was, and again, it's simply getting physiologically aroused by being around a crowd, and then thinking to yourself, geez, why do I have this feeling? That's James-Lange at work. And that's what this author was trying to explain in terms of the Nintendo Wii. You move your arms, you get into the game physically much more so than sitting on the couch and pressing buttons. And as a result, you have a better time and you have a stronger emotional reaction to video game playing, which is not necessarily something I'd want because my son already gets pretty into it, pretty emotional on some of these games, and I have as well. So here are the two studies that I think are very interesting that support Schachter and Singer's position on this. And one of them is the suspension bridge. But let me just start first with the other one, which people who've studied psychology might remember this. This was sometimes referred to as the Suproxin Study. I don't know if that rings a bell with anybody out there, but so back in the early 60s, here was the study, and this is just great. You got to love these guys. I guess that's why social psychology just appeals to me so much. These people are so creative, and so it's one of those weird studies. Okay, imagine this. Here's the setting. You're a student, and because, as you know, psychologists perform the majority of their studies on college students. And anyway, so you sign up for a study, you come into the room, you show up on time, maybe. And so you're told, listen, we're trying out a new medication. It's called Suproxin. It's really a vitamin preparation. And by the way, thanks to Morton Hunt, his well-known book, and should be well-known, The Story of Psychology. And I have a link to it. Just a fantastic book, great reference for anyone studying psychology, quite readable. And he goes over this on, what is this, page 497. So what it was, so that they were actually given this sort of vitamin preparation. And what it was adrenaline, and so it caused a physiological reaction. And that would be, heart racing, it's adrenaline, so that sort of, the face flushes perhaps, your hands might tremble, that kind of thing. All right? However, not everybody was told exactly what they were taking. So some people were told, okay, look, when you take this Suproxin, they weren't told that it was adrenaline, they were told it was Suproxin. When you take this, there might be a side effect, and the side effects would be your heart might race, you might have some sweaty palms, that kind of thing. So some subjects were told pretty much what was going to happen to them, although they still thought that it was a medication called Suproxin, and they thought that the study was about the effects of this medication, or actually, I'm sorry, it's referred to as a vitamin preparation, the effects on vision. All right, so that was the cover story. So they're given this, and they're told, listen, can you just, before we begin, that's when you know that's when you know the study's about to start, when the researcher says, oh yeah, before we start, can you just fill out this paperwork? And so they'd go over and fill out some paperwork. Okay, so they're filling out some paperwork, let's say. In comes another subject who's going to be truly in one of the experimental conditions. And in this case, he's given Suproxin, vitamin preparation to study the effects on vision, but is not told anything about side effects. Okay? So they are about to have a physiological reaction, and they won't even know why. Okay, so here you go. Here's the Suproxin. Oh, by the way, would you fill out the paperwork? So they go and they sit down and fill out the paperwork. Okay, so this is where the manipulation comes into play. While you're sitting there filling out the paperwork, in both conditions, in comes another person who you think is just another person in the study. He sits down next to you, and he's going to act in a couple of different ways. Well, he's going to act in one of two ways. In one case, this person is instructed, he's working along with the instructor, with the researcher, to act in a very irritable way. So this person gets mad at the questions. He rips up the paper. He sort of makes negative remarks about how stupid the whole thing is. Right? So he goes on and on about that. Finally throws the paper on the floor and walks out of the room. Okay? The other person acts the opposite way. Very happy. He says, hey, it's a good day for me. I'm feeling good. He's doodling. And, according to Hunt here, he's pitching a couple of the papers into the wastebasket, saying, hey, all right. He's making a little basketball game. He's making a paper airplane. He's just feeling good. You've been around that kind of person. Okay, why? So why would you have this? Well, and basically the results are this. If you were sitting there filling out your paperwork and you were told that you might have some side effects, so you're sitting there and all of a sudden you do feel a little heart. I'm sure it wasn't dangerous to any of the subjects. You feel your heart race a little bit, maybe a little sweaty palms. But that's due to the Suproxin. And now there's this guy over here who's acting either happy or mad. And you look over, and you're just looking and whatever. You don't know why exactly he's in such a mood. But in any case, that's it. So you fill the paperwork, and then you're told later, and you're given some scales to fill out, asking you about your mood. And what we find is that, your mood's pretty stable, nothing really up or down. But now picture yourself as one of the people who's sitting there, your heart's racing, you got sweaty palms, and there's this guy. And he's irritated, and he's going on, and he's in a mood. What happens to you? Well, as the results of this study turn out, it turns out that if you were in this situation where you had no explanation for your physiological condition, and you were with someone who was irritable, you were significantly more irritable, right? You, the theory goes, said, gee, I don't know, I must be, I'm not sure why I feel this way. Well, that guy, he was all, he was doing this, he got me all mad, right? That you interpret from the situation what it is you must be feeling. All right? And as far as the student, I keep calling him a student, he probably was a student, but the subject who was in the room with the happy guy, he's good. Hey, I don't know. I'm in a good mood. Things are going good. I'm feeling all right. My heart's racing. I must be feeling okay. I'm feeling pretty good. That guy was feeling good, and it rubbed off on me. Sure enough, right? Those subjects who did not know why they were so aroused attributed it to the other person. So, support for the Schachter and Singer theory of emotions. 2 factors: physiological arousal and your cognitive interpretation of the situation you're in. Pretty interesting, huh? Okay, last study would be this infamous suspension bridge study. Yes, indeed. Now, that actually was conducted by Dutton and Aaron, and this in the 70s. And I'll have these are not available online, but I'll have the references, the citations on the site. Very interesting study. So we've got this, what they did was they took 2 bridges, and one is very high. It's very, it's quite a drop, let's say. And let me just see if I wanted to. Okay. Let's see, and it was swaying, by a swaying suspension bridge over a deep canyon. That's one condition. And the other condition is a very low bridge, very stable, low bridge, only a few feet off the ground. Okay. So what did they do? Well, they had an attractive researcher walk up to men who were crossing the bridge and ask them if they would look at a picture and describe what's going on, sort of what we call a thematic apperception test, which is that sort of they give you a vague picture, ask you to draw, or to say, what do you think's going on there? Make up a story about it. And also fill out a questionnaire about their mood. And she gave each man her name and telephone number and said, if you want to find the results of this study, here's my contact information. All that, of course, was part of the dependent variable. In this case, the independent variable, the thing being manipulated, although we'll talk about this study in just a second, would be whether the bridge is suspended very high or whether it's very low. Dependent variable is a couple things. It's the mood, it's the content of the stories that they told, and the other thing that they looked at was whether or not the man called the woman sometime after the study. I'm sure he was interested in the results of the study. Yes, indeed. Anyway, so this same woman approached men on a suspension bridge. Now, the thought here being that if you're on a suspension bridge, you are probably in a state that is of physiological arousal, right? The bridge is swaying. It's a heck of a drop there, right? And the theory, again, being that if you're up there and someone approaches you, you would interpret, you'd be saying, gee, I'm all whatever, I'm worked up here, and there's this beautiful woman, and I must, it must be love, must be attraction. And then if you're on the lower bridge, somebody comes up to you and you might say, well, she's attractive, but, tell me a story, you tell the story, and you just walk on. Well, the results are pretty much supportive of that. significantly more men called the woman after the study, after about a week after the study, and asked her how it went, how'd the study go, how were the results. There was more sexual imagery in the stories that they told than among the men on the bridge that was only a few feet off the ground. Very interesting. Now, that's the suspension bridge study. Now, before I conclude the episode, let me just say that there is a huge problem with this study. A humongous hole, a tremendous confound, an alternative explanation for the results. But I'm not going to tell you in this episode. I'm going to save it for the next episode. Next episode is going to be on the exciting topic of research methods. Yes, indeed. Going to try to cover some of the major ways that we conduct scientific research. And one of the things I thought might be fun would be to just sort of leave you with the thought that there is a big problem with this study. And I'll give you one hint with it. The hint is selection. That's the hint. Okay. So, the very beginning of the next episode, I'll tell you what the problem with the study is, but give it some thought. What is the alternative explanation for the results of this study? Okay. There was an interesting website as I was doing some research on this episode, and by golly, I have to go back and find it. But they said something interesting, which is, okay, yes, interesting. Well, so what? Arousal comes first, emotions come first, okay, whatever. I guess the so what of this is this. Let's just think about this possibility. If I wanted to influence your emotions, might I get you in a situation which causes physiological arousal, and then try to get you to attribute that arousal to something? It could be a product, right? Have you ever seen those speeches that Steve Jobs gives, and the people in the audience are going wild or whatever? I'm sure there's a number of factors going there. But if you were there, you might, who knows, you might become a Mac fan if you're a PC person, right? Because you're there, you're all excited, you go, oh, this Mac stuff's amazing. So I might be able to manipulate you. All I would need to do is to get you into some kind of situation where you are aroused, and then influence you, perhaps through my words, to say, you know why you feel that way? Because this is such a good thing. Right? Very interesting, isn't it? I think that's one application. I also think that whatever, if you're going to go out on a date, you're probably not going to go out to the library, right? I mean, you're going to go out and do something fun. You're going to go somewhere exciting. You're going to try to pair, and this actually sounds a bit Pavlovian, but, you're going to try and go do something kind of exciting. You're going to go, I don't know, to the fair, right? Or somewhere to an exciting action movie in order to put together this aroused physical state with the person that you're with, right? Probably not going to go to the library. If you were thinking of that, I think I'd advise you against that. That's the two-factor theory. Hope this has been helpful and interesting. And don't forget to give that suspension bridge study another thought. Listen to that section again. See if you can figure out what the big problem with that study is. Okay, listen, don't forget the little mnemonic device I have for memorizing Erickson's stages. Check that out. It's on the website, www.thepsychfiles.com. I'll see you next time on The Psych Files. Take care.